today we're going to look at what I sometimes think what could be called the most significant or one of the most significant events in the Hebrew Bible that people don't really know so much about, or they don't think about it as much. We all know about the conquest of Jericho and the walls falling down and the Israelites coming to the Red Sea. But this one seems to be lesser known, and I think it's pretty significant. And it's the decimation of the Assyrian army in Judea in around 700 BC, 2,700 years ago. So it's quite a long time ago, almost 3,000 years ago. And it's recorded in 3 different places of the Bible, which is an evidence that it's pretty significant. The biblical authors, anytime 3 different books of the Bible have recorded this event, we should probably pay attention. There's something very significant going on here. Go ahead, Sean. And I think there's probably 2, I'm going to break down into 2 reasons why this event is significant. And the first one is the close correlation and agreement from 3 different sources, 3 different places of an event from, as I mentioned, almost 3,000 years ago. We have the Bible, those 3 places in the scripture. You can see them there, Isaiah chapter 36 to 37, and also in 2 Kings and in 2 Chronicles. And if you're looking for something to read later on, take a look at Isaiah 36 and 37 this afternoon. It's quite a story, quite an intervention on Judah's behalf by God. So we have the Bible, and then we have archaeological finds from both the land of Israel and from Assyria that are just amazing, that correlate with this biblical event, that confirm, that enlighten. And I personally don't know of any other biblical event that has such an amazing correlation of archaeological finds with the description in the Bible. So that's why this is significant as well. It gives an evidence that we're talking about a real historical event. And the people, we're going to see Hezekiah mentioned by the Assyrian king. The king of Judah, Hezekiah, is mentioned by the Assyrian king. And then, besides the archaeology, in even a little different category are the Assyrian historical records that align with this same event. Again, it's an incredible correlation or coming together of both the biblical event and the non-biblical sources. That's one reason that this event is significant. And then next, Sean. The second is that I think the biblical authors see in this event, this decimation of the Assyrian army in Judea, as a parallel to the destruction of the Egyptian army on the shores of the Red Sea. And that in both cases, the authors of the Bible are telling us God, Yud-He-Vav-He, right? That's how you spell God's name in Hebrew, Yud-He-Vav-He, the 4 Hebrew letters. God is with Israel, or God is with Judah. This is evidence that he is with Judah. So for these 2 reasons, I think this event is pretty significant. The close correlation of the Bible with non-biblical sources and archaeological sources, and then the reason that the authors are presenting. Next. A couple of verses just to sort of set the scene, and there's a little bit of Bible geography and some Hebrew names here. So let's look at just a couple verses from Isaiah chapter 36, just 1 and 2, and then verse 37. This event where the Assyrians, this big power from, I'll show it on a map in just a second, from hundreds of miles away is attacking the king in Judah, Hezekiah. All right? So, Isaiah chapter 36, in the 14th year of King Hezekiah, he's the king of Judah, Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and took them. So we have this empire conquering territory from hundreds of miles away, and now he's in the area of Judah around the city of Jerusalem. And the king of Assyria sent the Rabshakeh, a commander of his forces, I believe, with a military force. He sends him up to Jerusalem with a large army from Lachish, this is another city name, to Hezekiah at Jerusalem. and he threatens Hezekiah. He says, give up. It's worthless for you to resist. Didn't we conquer all the other territories all the way from my capital in Assyrian Nineveh? Tyre and Sidon, they've fallen. It's worthless for you to resist. It's better if you give up. You'll at least survive. Otherwise, you're going to die. So he threatens him. And we'll talk about what Hezekiah does. He seeks counsel from the prophet Isaiah. Eventually, that Rabshakeh, this messenger, is going to return. This other verse. The Rabshakeh returned and found the king of Assyria fighting against Libnah, for he had heard that the king had left Lachish. So what's happened is the king of Assyria has conquered the city of Lachish, and now he's moving closer to Jerusalem. The next city is Libnah. Next slide. A picture of the city of Lachish. In the land of Israel, there are ruins of cities. We call them tells, T-E-L or T-E-L-L. It's an accumulation of debris. It forms a mound, right? So that the archaeologist now goes in and he investigates, takes very carefully, layer by layer, pieces from these mounds and finds remnants of human civilization from hundreds and thousands of years ago. And at this city, Lachish, see it spelled there, try and get that name, I know it's a foreign word. The city that Sennacherib was conquering, when he sent that messenger up to Hezekiah, they found some amazing things that correlate to the biblical description. Okay, so here's Lachish. It's about 25 miles from Jerusalem. It's not very far. All right? Not so far. Sennacherib is sieging. Now, let's back up in history just a second to see the Assyrian Empire and their expansion. You can hit one more too, Sean. Nineveh was their capital, and by this time, Sennacherib has come, like I say, hundreds of miles. And eventually, the Assyrian Empire is going to make their way to Egypt. And that's really what Sennacherib's destination was. He wants to control the then known world between the ancient cradles of civilization, the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, and the Nile River. So this is the strongest empire that the world has yet seen, right? When the Assyrians are coming. This is like if the United States of America decides to go and attack, I don't know, some small country in South America somewhere. And they're saying, give up or else. Okay, the strongest empire in the world is threatening. We'll see how big Judah is in just a second. Maybe 50 miles square. Okay, that's what's going to be left over for Judah at this time. So here's Assyria. It's come all the way. Next slide, Sean. And next, keep going. We're going to click through. Assyria, in about 20 years before this, has taken the northern kingdom of Israel, 10 of the tribes of Israel, into captivity. They destroyed their capital in Samaria, and the people, by and large, were taken away. So Hezekiah is a youth and sees this happening. His father Ahaz probably was the king at the time. But they experience the destruction of their brother's capital in the north and the taking away of Israelites. This is another thing to keep in mind. They've seen already the Israelites go into captivity. Next, keep going. And you see little Judah there is hanging on, right? They come down the coast. They don't leave. They're not going to stay there. Remember, their destination is really Egypt. Keep going, Sean, through the arrows here. Next, okay? They take the coast. Eventually, they want to be able to secure this passageway to Egypt. They don't want anybody in the way. And that's why, here's Judah. I say it's a territory in square miles, maybe 30 by 30 miles left over now. A little bit bigger, maybe 50 by 50 miles left over. The biggest empire in the world tells the king, hey, give up or else. Look at how far we've come. So now they're on the coast now, and now they start to siege the cities within the territory of Judah. It's hill country, right? It's mountainous up to maybe 3,000 feet in elevation is the highest mountain. Next. So let's back up and look at our text again. Just to remind you what's Hezekiah's dilemma here. In the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah, and now he is coming into Judah, and took them. He recorded Sennacherib did that he took 46 towns in Judah, deported the people. And the Bible correlates with that he came against the fortified cities of Judah and took them. And the king of Assyria sent the Rabshakeh from Lachish to King Hezekiah at Jerusalem with a great army. Okay, remember, we looked at that. Now he's threatening Hezekiah. Next slide. We'll talk about, here it is. Click through this to see these arrows coming down. He takes these other cities in Judah. There's another city he conquers right here called Azekah, which he records how he came against it with battering rams. He says it was like an eagle's nest, but I took it with my sappers and we destroyed the town and exiled its people. And then he comes to our town right here, Lachish, okay, where the red is. Go ahead, click one more, Sean, I think. And then when he's sieging Lachish, he sends his Rabshakeh, this military emissary, and comes at Jerusalem from the north. And this is another passage in the book of Isaiah that talks about this Assyrian army coming at Jerusalem from the north. And he gets to within earshot of the city. Recall this? And the Assyrian emissary is saying, give up. You got nothing to hold on to. Yahweh himself, he says, has brought me here. Partly that's true. And Hezekiah is going to hear this message. He goes to the prophet Isaiah and prays. What should we do? What should we do? Yud-He-Vav-He, Yahweh, we know you are God. What should we do? Look at our dilemma. 25 miles away. One more slide, I think. Only 25 miles away. Okay, that's Lachish. And remember, Sennacherib is going to be successful in taking that city. One more slide, one more click. And then he comes a step closer to another town, that's Libnah. So he's on his way. Okay? What should we do? Next slide. Here's the response. God, through the prophet Isaiah, right? Isaiah was his spokesman. When Isaiah spoke, it was Yud-He-Vav-He, God speaking. Doesn't mean that God was standing there physically as Isaiah the prophet, but when Isaiah spoke, it was God speaking. He says, I guess we'll wait. We'll see what he says in just a second, okay? I want to just pause now. We're going to look at the correlation of the archaeology, the historical records from outside the Bible that correlate well with the scriptures. It shows that this is a real event. This is a historical event. There's no doubting that this happened. The first interesting archaeological find is what's called Hezekiah's tunnel and the Siloam inscription. And when we read about Hezekiah's deeds, we learn that he carved a tunnel to bring water inside the city, getting ready for this coming of the Assyrian military. Let's read this, 2 Chronicles 32. A large force of men assembled, and they blocked all the springs and the stream that flowed in the land, saying, why should the kings of Assyria come and find plenty of water? Right? They don't want this attacking enemy to have water supply and cut it off from their access. Let's get the water supply inside the city. Next. Hezekiah closed the upper outlet of the waters of the Gihon, that's the spring in Jerusalem, and directed them down to the west side of the city of David. So he brought the water source more accessible inside the city, and we're going to see he fortifies that area. He prevents the Assyrians from getting it and makes sure that he has a supply of water. Okay, that's the biblical description. Next. And we find this tunnel. It was carved through the rock. It's about 1,700 feet long, and some places about 100 feet underneath the surface. So it brought water from the spring, which was sort of just on the edge of the city on the outside, inside of the city, to the other side of the city of David, as the chronicler said it. And you can see people walking through the tunnel. When it got to the end, it was quite high. Sometimes it's about that high, right, in the middle. So when you go through it, you're stooping down. But we can see they adjusted the level at this end to make the waters flow. And they just flow gently the whole way to the pools of Siloam, where, remember in the New Testament, that's where Jesus sent the blind man. He washed and came back seeing. Siloam means sent. Now, right where this gal is standing, just at the exit of the tunnel, they found an inscription, like a plaque, chiseled into the rock. Okay, next. We call this the Siloam Tunnel inscription. It's in Paleo-Hebrew, ancient Hebrew, the writing, the letters that they were using during the time of Hezekiah. You can see the etchings here, these different Hebrew letters. It's a description of the carving of the tunnel. They said, okay, this is the way this tunnel was carved, because it was quite a feat. We started at both ends with chisels and hammers. We bring the stuff out on both ends, and then the people met and the waters flowed. Next. So, and just recently now, archaeologists believe, see, that thing was found when the Turks were ruling over the land of Israel in the 1800s. Now it's in the Istanbul Museum. But when they chiseled it out, it looks like they didn't see a couple of lines on the bottom. And now the archaeologists are saying we can actually decipher 2 more lines, and it looks like the name Hezekiah is actually mentioned in that inscription. Because in the one that they carved, they pulled out of the wall, they chiseled from behind, they take it out and bring it to a museum, Hezekiah's name's not mentioned, just how the tunnel was carved. But it looks like they missed a couple of lines, and the archaeologists are now saying, looks like Hezekiah's name is there. And now they found additional inscriptions. One of them here, which looks like it's a piece of some kind of a dedicatory inscription, a stone that had an inscription on saying, looks like we have the name Hezekiah. Again, this is the ancient Hebrew, the word Hezekiah and the word pool. It's just a small fragment, but that's amazing. In association with this tunnel and the Siloam pool that you have, looks like Hezekiah's name and the word pool in Hebrew. And now the archaeologists they knew that there were other frames in this tunnel, but they didn't decipher any inscription. But they went back recently. This is now within about 5 years. And they say, there must be inscriptions on this. Why would they carve a frame and not have an inscription? So they take pictures of it with this high advanced photography, and they believe they're deciphering inscriptions on these additional chiseled in texts in this tunnel, and they think that they have Hezekiah's name there as well. Next. So you see what we're doing here? We're looking, this is a significant event because we have this correlation of the archaeological finds with the biblical event. Here's another one. The Bible says that Hezekiah built an additional wall. He, Hezekiah, strengthened himself and built up all the wall that had been broken down and raised it up to the towers, and he built the other wall outside. So in the city of Jerusalem, in the upper hill, it's called the Western Hill, archaeologists found in the late 1960s, early 1970s, what they believe is a wall that was built by Hezekiah to enclose this section of the city. And they believe this is the other wall mentioned here in 2 Chronicles 32. He built another wall, enclosing the area of the expansion of his city. Probably had northerners, Israelites that were fleeing that conquest by Assyria, coming and finding protection in Judah. So the city of Jerusalem would have grown significantly 20 years or so before, and he encloses that area. And archaeologists have found this, right? It's in the modern Jewish quarter, and the remnants of that wall have been discovered. Next. Another thing that the Bible says that Hezekiah did is that he got rid of all the high places and the improper religious worship. A reform. We're coming back. We're worshiping only Yahweh. Look at the text here in 2 Chronicles 32. They went out to the towns of Judah and smashed the standing stones. Okay, we'll talk about those in just a second. Here's a couple of standing stones where they're dedicating using those in the worship of God, whichever God they thought they were worshiping. They destroyed the high places and the altars throughout Judah and Benjamin. So we have a record of a destruction of the incorrect places and ways of worship. And the archaeologists have found the evidence of this destruction in several places. Among them is where these pictures come from. One more hit on this slide. It's called Arad. It's in the south. It's kind of drier area. But you see it's a fortified area. Okay? It was a Canaanite city previous to the coming of Israel. And there was this big fortress up here during the time of Solomon, and from Solomon's time and on, and in Hezekiah's time. And in that fortress, they found a temple. It was a high place where they were burning incense, making sacrifices with animals. It was a high place. And it was destroyed. And the archaeologists, through the dating methods that are available, they think that it's Hezekiah that was responsible for that destruction. See how it correlates with the biblical text? Yeah, John. We're looking east. Yeah, we're in the south of the country, but looking east, right over this ridge, you drop down to the Dead Sea. Yep. Next. We're looking from the west to the east. Yep. Sorry. Dale. Yep.
So are the high places places where they were starting to worship the gods of the nations then? That Hezekiah's cleaned up?
Yes, it's probably a little everything, because they... That's part of it. Where should it be done? And how were they worshiping Yahweh? A good example of that is, remember, when the northern kingdom divided from the Davidic monarchy, they said, no, David's monarchy to your own. We're starting our own. They made religious centers in Bethel and Dan, and they said, here's Yahweh. We're worshiping Yahweh with golden calves. Sound familiar? So it's kind of it could be a perverted form of Yahweh worship, even by the fact that it's outside of Jerusalem. Historians argue if there was ever a way in which you could build an altar and make a sacrifice to Yahweh appropriately outside of Jerusalem. I happen to think you could. But in later times, I think it's a perverted form. Yep. So if they're actually worshiping other pagan gods, in some cases, yes. I mean, you have enough evidence of that in the Bible that you're worshiping somebody else other than Yahweh. But in other times, they're probably building these things, and they say they're worshiping Yahweh, but you wonder if they really are. Yeah. So now this is Arad that we're looking at from the west to the east there, right? And this is that temple. Okay, here's an animal sacrificial altar. This is just the remnants of it, right? It's not still standing entirely because it was destroyed. And that destruction is attributed to Hezekiah. And this is the court you'd go through. And then here's the holy place. And in this holy place, we had incense burning altars, right? Just like in the temple, you'd burn incense. And in the Holy of Holies, they had these two standing stones. And they were to be smashed, according to the book of Deuteronomy. And this is what Hezekiah, in his reforms, they did. They went out and smashed the standing stones. Next. So you see another way in which the archaeology really aligns with what we have in the Bible. Here's another altar that was found in the area of Beersheba. Destroyed, the archaeologists think it's from the time of Hezekiah. Next. Another evidence that corresponds with the biblical record is what we call the Lemelech, belonging to the king, stamps on jar handles. There's hundreds of these, actually thousands of these found, with an inscription on it saying, belonging to the king. And we see the record in the scripture, again, 2 Chronicles, Hezekiah had storehouses also for the yield of grain, wine, and oil. Partly what this is a centralization of getting supplies ready because they know they've got an empire that wants them gone. So they're going to try to live and survive through this conquest. Next. So when we go out to the archaeological record, one more, Sean, here's a site near Beersheba. This is the modern city of Beersheba here. And here's an archaeological ruin from the time of the Israelite Judean kings. And you see the storehouses right here where these storage jars for wine, grain, and oil were discovered. And again, it lines up with the historical narrative as the Bible describes. Next. Interesting find here, we have clay seal impressions that you would seal a document with. These were found in Jerusalem right by the Temple Mount. In a picture I'll show you in just a second where they were found. And they were found very close to each other. This one, this is the Paleo-Hebrew again, says belonging to Isaiah. And the second line they argue over, it might say the prophet, but the last letter is missing. So it might be like a site name that is close to the Hebrew word for prophet. But we've got Isaiah's name on this seal. This one is clear. See this how it's broken off? We don't see the last letter. This one's clear. Belonging to Hezekiah, the son of Ahaz, king of Judah. Okay, in the archaeological record, we found seals, next slide, right at the Temple Mount. Okay, this is the temple in Jerusalem. Today it's an Islamic mosque area. And this has all been excavated. See how they've gone through and found stuff. They just carefully remove the dirt, half inch by half inch at a time. And they found very close to the Temple Mount, that's where those seals were found. I mean, that's amazing. We have the name Isaiah. We don't know for sure if it's the prophet, but it definitely could be. And then we've got the king of Judah, Hezekiah, no question there, found in that context right at the temple. So these are real people. Nobody can argue and say, oh, Hezekiah wasn't a real person, right? He was. There's no doubt about it. Next. The Assyrian records now. We found in excavations, different places, but mainly in Assyria, these, they call them prisons. They're about this high of clay. And Sennacherib had stamped on these prisons a record of his conquests, right? And in this, he's going to mention Hezekiah. Go to the next slide. Here's a description from one of the prisons. This is Sennacherib, the Assyrian records of him conquering. He says, as to Hezekiah the Jew, so here's confirmation that the king of Judea, and it was named Hezekiah, not from the Bible, not even from a seal or something from the land of Israel, but from Assyria, from the Assyrian king. As to Hezekiah the Jew, he did not submit to my yoke. I laid siege to his strong cities, walled forts, countless small villages, conquered them by means of well-stamped earthen ramps, battering rams, brought near to the walls with an attack by foot soldiers. I drove out 200,000, 150 people, young and old, male and female, horses, mules, donkeys, camels, big and small, cattle beyond counting, and considered them slaves. Himself, right, that's Hezekiah, I made a prisoner in Jerusalem, his royal residence like a bird in a cage. Okay? So he says, I sieged everything, but did he defeat Hezekiah? He didn't. Okay? He said he can only boast that I caged him up like a bird in a cage in his royal residence, Jerusalem. Next. He needed to boast about something. He didn't conquer Jerusalem, and we're going to see he was humiliated. So he needed to boast. So what he did is he went back to Nineveh and he decorated a throne room in his palace. I mean, this is like his main throne room of a depiction of his siege and conquest, not of Jerusalem, but of Lachish, the other town we looked at. He needed to boast about something. And this thing's amazing. It's over 100 feet long. Some cases, these panels are preserved to 8 feet high. In other places, you can see they're not, right? Because, again, this was excavated in the late 1800s when the British were excavating. Now the thing is in the British Museum. You can imagine how touchy these things can be, right? You took it from Iraq, and now it's in the British Museum. But they put it on the plaster now. This was, like I say, the throne room. This is where he would have sat and judged and so forth. And it's a depiction of him coming to the city of Lachish, his soldiers sieging the city, the captives being brought, the booty being brought before him. Next. And here he is, Sennacherib, seated on his throne, while the booty of Lachish is being brought before him. Now, how do I know that? Because he put an inscription right there. And here's what it says. Sennacherib, king of the universe, king of Assyria, seated on his throne as the booty of Lachish is brought before him. All right, seated on the throne. Actually really an amazing picture. Google this if you're interested, because you can see how Israelites lived, the culture, their pots and their pans and their weaponry and all these kinds of things, and their clothing, the beard styles. You can see the different Assyrian beards here. See that kind of like a cropped square versus the Judeans. They're curly haired, their beards are a little closer. And notice, okay, so here's a commander of the Assyrian forces. He's coming before saying the city's captured, and then behind we're going to have all the booty coming before him, right? This is just one of the panels. These guys are worshiping. Okay, that's worship right there. Bowing down. You're saying, I honor you. Okay, it's the same word in Hebrew, right? Because they know their lives depended on it in this case. But they've taken off their uniforms. They're in their nightgown now, right? Because you give up. No vestige of any military, I give up. They're wearing their skivvies, I guess you could say here, okay? So it's really an interesting panel. There he is. He's got a boast about his conquest of Lachish. Next. Just note here, and go ahead one more, Sean. It's a little close-up of an area of the soldiers. One more click, Sean. Okay, look at these guys are slingers. They go in pairs, and they're slinging stones. Okay, this was a part of the military job. They'd have slingers, and they'd have archers. Here, right, see the arrows? Okay, next slide. And notice this Assyrian soldier, his shield down here. He's got a spear, a helmet, and look at this little decorative piece on his helmet, kind of a flare with a piece here, and then he's going to have like feathers or something sticking in it. Okay, this is from the Sennacherib siege of Lachish. Next, and now the fine. Okay, there's that little headpiece. Next, the fines at Lachish, sling stones. They're about as big as a tennis ball. Some of them a little bit smaller. Okay, the arrowheads. And they even found one of the pieces of the Assyrian helmet. Okay? So again, the archaeological finds it's an amazing correlation between the Bible, the Assyrian records, and what's found still in the ground from 2,700 years ago. Next. The ramp. The Assyrians built a siege ramp because you saw the tell. It's about, the walls are probably about 60 feet above the area around. So you've got to build, to get to a siege ramp to smash the wall, they had to build a ramp up to it with just dirt, earth, rocks, etc. And that's what's being depicted here in these various sloping ramparts. Here's part of the tower, the wall of the city of Lachish. They're bringing a battering ram up to the wall. See that right here? And the Judeans are up here in the tower throwing torches down onto the battering rams to try and burn it. The Assyrians are putting water on it to try and prevent the burning of their siege ramps. Here are the captives being brought out. Look at these guys. They're impaled on poles. Okay? You crucify somebody outside the wall to tell these guys up here in the city, give up. Otherwise, this is what's going to happen to you. So again, it's a very boastful claim of his conquest and siege of Lachish. Next. The archaeologists have found remnants of that siege ramp that the Assyrians built up to get up to the height where the wall was, to get their battering rams and so forth up onto the city itself. Next. So the significance of this event, again, there are two things. And the first thing I mentioned is this amazing correlation and agreement from three sources of this biblical event from 2,700 years ago. The Bible, the non-biblical Assyrian records, and all of these archaeological finds. These things, it's amazing. Even in the New Testament, I don't think the archaeological finds come together so well as they do for this particular event. And then the second point, second significance, is that the destruction of the Assyrian military, which we're going to see in just a second, parallels the destruction of the Egyptian military at the Reed Sea. And both of these are evidence that Yahweh, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, who is with Israel, he's with Judah. This is the point of the book of Isaiah. is Yahweh with us or not? Is he with us? And this is evidence that he is with Israel and Judah and that he's the supreme God, the only God, compared to this king of Assyria. When you, again, look at the text in Isaiah 36 and 37, he said, there's only one God. It's me. Yud-Heh-Vav, he says. Next. Isaiah 37:6. This was the answer that Isaiah, or God, spoke through Isaiah to King Hezekiah. When Hezekiah was praying, what do? This king is threatening us. What do? He's conquered all these other lands. What do we do, Yahweh? What should we do? Should we give up? Here's what Yahweh told him. Thus says Yahweh, do not be afraid because of the words that you've heard from the king of Assyria, right? With which the servants of the king of Assyria have reviled me. Next. Therefore, thus says Yahweh, concerning the king of Assyria, he shall not come into this city, that's Jerusalem, or shoot an arrow there, or come before it with a shield, or cast up a siege mound against it, okay, just like he depicted in Lachish. By the way that he came, he shall return, and he shall not come into this city, says Yahweh. For I will defend this city to save it, for my own sake and for the sake of my servant David. Next. Do not be afraid. So Hezekiah got that message from Isaiah, and now he turns to the people, and he says to the people of Judah, do not be afraid or dismayed before the king of Assyria and all the horde that is with him, for there is one greater with us than with him. Is God with Judah or not? That's the question. With him, that's the Assyrians, is an arm of flesh, but with us is Yahweh our God, to help us and to fight our battles. And the people took confidence from the words of Hezekiah, king of Judah. Remember, we have this earlier description in the book of Isaiah when a woman will conceive, and they're going to call that child God with us. Now, here's the evidence that God is with Judah. Doesn't mean that he's physically walking around as a human being or something like that. It means that God is with Judah. How do we know? Next. Continuing in our story in Isaiah, and the angel of Yahweh, it's almost like Yahweh doesn't have to really go himself, but he's with Israel, he's with Judah by the fact that he sent a messenger, right? The angel of Yahweh went forth and slew 185,000. Now, this is an interesting study in Hebrew because that word thousand can mean a unit. It might mean 185 military units, like groups of whatever. A unit might be 12. Okay, 185 military units of 24 guys each, it's significant. Or it might be 185,000 individuals. He slew 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians, and when the men of Judah arose early in the morning, behold, these were all dead bodies. That great, mighty, powerful Assyria, we saw some of the soldiers depicted. They went out and they saw them dead. That's all they were, dead bodies. Then Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and went home and dwelt in Nineveh. He didn't conquer the city of Jerusalem. Next. Before I look at the parallel, let me just make this point. Historians all recognize that this is amazing that Sennacherib did not conquer the city of Jerusalem. Everybody recognizes that something significant happened here because this guy, like I say, was the king of the most powerful empire, military empire that the world had seen. And that he didn't deal with this little pocket of resistant Jews up in the hill country. He didn't take care of them like he did everybody else along the way. Everybody knows something happened here, right? Because it just doesn't make sense that he would leave Hezekiah like a bird in a cage. Why didn't he conquer him? So people are going to wonder, what happened here? Something happened? Was it a plague of mice that struck his soldiers? Or in the Bible, there's another description of a military coming up from Africa, southern Egypt. And that might be the messenger. I think it's a possibility. Right? Sometimes God's messengers, not sometimes, most of the time, God's messengers are human beings. It's the same word. Angel, messenger in Hebrew is the same word. So that might be what happened here, is that the Egyptian army came up, did the battle, did the fighting, right at the moment that was necessary. Could be. Or this could be a supernatural slaying that they just woke up dead. Okay, then look at this verse from the book of Exodus about the destruction of the other empire of the day, Egypt. It was Assyria in Sennacherib's time. Some hundreds of years before that, it was Egypt. Remember what the result of that event was? Thus Yahweh saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians, when Israel came through the Red Sea, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead upon the seashore. So there's that parallel when the Israelites, or the Judeans, they go out and their enemy is just dead bodies. That's all it is. And I think we're to see that parallel. Yahweh takes care of that empire, the greatest empire of that time, Egypt, dead bodies. Now in Hezekiah's time, the greatest empire, dead bodies. One more slide. This is how Isaiah ends his book. They shall go forth and look on the dead bodies of the men that have rebelled against me. This is Yahweh speaking. For there, that is belonging to those people, their worm shall not die, and their fire shall not be quenched. It doesn't mean that they're still alive. It means that the worm is eating their dead bodies, and the fire. There's two things you have to do after a decimation like that. The bodies are going to start to corrupt, and the worms are going to eat them. And then human beings go out and start the fire because you don't want that stuff around. Right? So that's the depiction going on here of worm not dying and fire not being quenched. It's to remove it's a depiction of what happens to those who oppose Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Their fire shall not be quenched, and they shall be an abhorrence to all flesh. That's their end. Destruction, decimation. Next slide. And we'll keep going, Sean. One more. So here's what we have. The Bible is telling us that these great empires, Egypt, to little Israel's southwest here, a huge empire, Egypt, and this huge empire, Assyria, the empires of the nations, of the Gentiles, these huge empires, what happens? One more click, Sean. They're gone. Their gods are gone. Their power is gone. Their flesh with us is one who is not flesh. With us is one, the maker of everything. So little Judah holds out. But now, Yahweh our God, this is Hezekiah praying, save us out of his hand, out of the hand of the king of Assyria, so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you, Yahweh our God, you alone. That's the lesson of the Egyptian destruction, of the Assyrian destruction. Next, Sean. How's our time? We're done. So I won't look at Psalm 48, but you can see the same theme. See, like the writers remembered the destruction of the Egyptian empire later on in history, recalling how God had done such great things, so they are going to with this destruction too. And I think like Psalm 48 is a good example of that, where Yahweh defends the city of Jerusalem. The psalmist even says Yahweh is in the city of Jerusalem's fortresses. He's here. He's in them. He's in the palaces. Oh, look at that first verse. Yahweh is great, worthy of praise in the city of our God, his holy hill, Mount Zion. God is in her fortresses. He's in them. It doesn't mean like physically, right? Ontologically or essence. But God is there. They knew it. He decimated the Assyrian army. Okay, one more, I think. Sean? Yeah. So remember that lesson from the city of Lachish.